Hello guys, it's is Project Management Lecture 5, and in this lecture we will talk about the project scope management. Content of lecture is plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBC, validate scope, control scope, and at the end of the lecture I will explain about your task number 4. So, project management includes a process required to ensure that the project includes all the work required, and only the work required to complete the project successfully. Managing the project scope is primarily concerned with the defining and controlling what is and is not included in the project. The project context. The term scope can refer to product scope and project scope. Here you can see the diagram of project scope management overview. How you see? Here we have steps like plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, create WBC, validate scope, and control scope. And all these requirements have their inputs and tools techniques, outputs. Plan scope management. Plan scope management is the process of creating a scope management plan that documents how the project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. Here in inputs we have project management plan, project charter, enterprise, environmental factors, organizational process assets. In tool and techniques we have expert judgment, meetings. On outputs, scope management plan, requirements management plans. Project scope management. Here, after plan scope management, it goes to collect requirements and define scope and create WBC. Project management plan. Approved subsidiary plans of the project management plan are used to create the scope management plan and influence the approach taken for planning scope and managing the project scope. Organizational process assets. The organizational process assets that can influence the plan scope management process include, but are not limited to, policies and procedures, historical information and lesson learned knowledge base. Expert judgment. Expert judgment refers to input received from knowledgeable and experienced parties. Expertise may be provided by any group or person with specialized education, knowledge, skill, experience, or training in developing scope management plan. Take note that this part is very important because you have task according to this expert judgment. And about meetings. Project teams may attend project meetings to develop the scope management plan. Scope management plan. The scope management plan is component of the project or program management plan that describes how the scope will be defined, developed, monitored, controlled, and verified. The scope management plan is major input into the develop project management plan process and the other scope management processes. The components of scope management plan include process for preparing a detailed project scope management process to enables the creation of WBC from the detailed project scope statement. Process that establishes how the WBC will be maintained and approved. Process that specifies how formal acceptance of the completed project deliverables will be obtained. Process to control how requests for changes to detailed project scope statement will be processed. This process is directly linked to the perform integrated change control process. The scope management plan can be formal and or informal, broadly framed or highly detailed. based on the needs of the projects. Here is a requirements management plan. Requirements management plan is component of the project management plan that describes how requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed. Collect requirements is a process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. Collect requirements. Collect requirements is a process of determining, documenting, and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet project objectives. The key benefit of this process is that it provides the basis for defining and managing the project scope, including product scope. Here in input, we have scope management plan, requirements management plan, stakeholder management plan, project charter, stakeholder register. In tools and techniques, interviews, focus groups, facilitated workshops, group creativity techniques, group decision-making techniques, questionnaires and surveys, observations, prototypes, benchmarking, context diagrams, documents analysis. On output, requirements documentations, requirements traceability matrix. Here you can see in detail the diagram of plan scope management. Not plan scope management, it's diagram of collect requirements. Here is not so important, but you can read it. Here. Many organization categories requirements into different types, such as a business and technical solutions. The former referring to stakeholder needs and the latter as to how those needs will be implemented. Requirements can be grouped into classification allowing for further refinement and detail as the requirements are elaborated. This classification include business requirements, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, transition requirements, project requirements, and quality requirements. Scope management plan. Scope management plan provides clarity as to how project teams will determine which type of requirements need to be collected for the project. Requirements management plan. Requirements management plan provides a process that will be used throughout the collect requirements process to define and document the stakeholder needs. Stakeholder management plan. The stakeholder management plan is used to understand stakeholder communication requirements and the level of stakeholders engagement in order to assess and adapt to the level of stakeholder participation in requirements activities. Project charter. The project charter is used to provide the high-level description of the product, service, or result of the project so that detailed requirements can be developed. Stakeholder register. The stakeholder register is used to identify stakeholders who can provide information on the requirements. The stakeholder register also captures major requirements and main expectations stakeholders may have for the project. Interviews. An interview is a formal or informal approach to elicit information from stakeholder by talking to them directly. It is typically performed by asking prepared and spontaneous questions and recording the responses. Focus group. Focus groups bring together pre-qualified stakeholders and subject matter experts to learn about their expectations and attitudes about a proposed product, service, or results. Facilitated workshops. Facilitated workshops are focused sessions that bring key stakeholders together to define product requirements. Okay. Group creativity techniques. Several activities can be organized to identify project and product requirements. Some of group creativity techniques that can be used are brainstorming, nominal group technique, idea mapping, mind mapping, affinity diagram, multi-criteria decision analysis. Group decision Group decision making techniques. Group decision making technique is an assessment process having multiple alternatives with an expected outcome in the form of future actions. Questionnaires and surveys. Questionnaires and surveys are written sets of questions designed to quickly accumulate information from a large number of respondents. Observations provide a direct way of viewing individuals in their environment and how they perform their jobs and tasks and carry out a process. It is particularly helpful for the tailored process when the people that use the product have difficulty or are reluctant to articulate their requirements. Prototypes. Prototyping is a method of obtaining early feedback on requirements by providing a working model of the expected product before actually building it. Since a prototype is tangible, it allows stakeholders to experiment with a model of the final product rather than being limited to discussing abstract representations of their requirements. Benchmarking involves comparing actual or planned practice, such as the process and operations, to those of comparable organization to identify best practices, generate ideas for improvement, and provide a basis for measuring performance. Context diagrams. Context diagram is an example of a scope model. Document analysis. Document analysis is used to elicit requirements by analyzing existing documentation and identifying information relevant to their requirements. Requirements documentation describes how individual requirements meet the business need for the project. The format of requirements document may range from a simple document listing all the requirements categorized by stakeholder and priority, to more elaborate forms containing an executive summary, detailed descriptions, and attachment. A component of requirement documentation can include business requirements, business and project objectives for traceability, business rules for the performing organization, guiding principles of the organization, stakeholder requirements, solution requirements, project requirements, transition requirements, requirements assumption, dependencies, and concentrates. Requirement traceability matrix. Requirements traceability matrix is a grid that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfy them. Finally, it provides a structure for managing changes to the product scope. It's like tracing business needs, project objectives, project scope, project design, product design, product development, test strategy, and scenarios, high-level requirements to more detailed requirements. Define scope. Define scope is a process of developing a detailed description of the project and product. Here in the input you have a scope management plan, project charter, requirements documentation, original organizational process assets. In techniques and tools and techniques you have expert judgment, product analysis, alternatives generation, facilitated workshops. On output, project scope management, Project scope statement, project documentation updates. Here is the workflow of define scope. After defining scope, you may directly create a WBC, or you can go by project scope statement like sequences, estimate activity durations, and develop schedule. The preparation of detailed project scope statement is critical to project success and builds upon the measure deliverables, assumptions, and constraints that are documented during project initiation. Scope management plan. The scope management plan is a component of the project management plan that establishes the activities for the developing, monitoring, and controlling the project scope. Project charter. The project charter provides a high-level project description and product characteristics. High level means it's in detail. Requirements documentation. This documentation will be used to select the requirements that will be included in the project. Organizational process assets. Organizational process assets can influence how scope is defined. Examples include policies, procedures, and templates, project files from previous projects, lesson learned from previous phases or project. Expert judgment. Expert judgment is often used to analyze the information needed to develop the project scope statement. Such judgment and expertise is applied to any technical detail. Such expertise is provided by any group or individual with a specialized knowledge or training and is available from many sources, including other units within the organization, consultants, stakeholders, including customers or sponsors, professional and technical industry groups, and subject matter experts. It means that the expert judgment means that someone from out your project will give the feedback to your project. Product analysis. For projects that have a product as a deliverable, as opposed to the service or result, product analysis can be an effective tool. Alternatives generation. Alternative generation is a technique used to develop as many potential options as possible in order to identify different approaches to execute and perform the work of the project. Facilitated workshops. Participation of key players with a variety of expectations and or fields of expertise. In this intensive working sessions help to reach a cross-functional and common understanding of the project objectives and its limits. Project scope management. Project scope management project scope statement. Project scope statement is a description of the project scope, major deliverables, assumptions, and constraints. It enables to the project team to perform more detailed planning, guides the project team's work during execution, and provides a baseline for evaluating whether requests for changes or additional work are contained within or outside the project boundaries. Here you can see like a product scope description, acceptance criteria, project exclusion, constraints, and assumptions. Project document updates. Project documents that may be updated include stakeholder register, requirements documentation, and requirements traceability matrix. Create WBC. Create WBC is a process of subdividing project deliverables and project work into smaller, more manageable components. The key benefit of this process is that it provides a structured vision of what has to be delivered. The WBC is a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by the project team to accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. Here in input you have scope management plan, project scope statement, requirements documentation, expertise, environmental factors, organizational process assets, in tools and techniques, decomposition, expert judgment, outputs. In outputs you have scope baseline, and project documents updates. Here's a workflow of creating WBC. Scope management plan. The scope management plan here specifies how to create the WBC from the detailed project scope statement and how the WBC will be maintained and approved. Project scope statement. The project scope statement describes the work that will be performed and the work that excluded. Requirement documentation is detailed requirements. Documentation is essential for understanding what needs to be produced as a result of the project and what needs to be done to deliver the project. Enterprise environmental factors. Industry-specific WBC standards relevant to the nature of the project may serve as external reference sources for creation of the WBC. Organizational process assets. The organizational process assets that can influence the create WBC process include the policies, procedure, and templates for the WBC, project files from previous projects, lessons learned from the previous projects. Decomposition. Decomposition is a technique used for dividing and subdividing the project scope and project deliverables into smaller, more manageable parts. Decomposition of the total work, project work into the work package generally involves the following activities: identifying and analyzing the deliverables and the related work, structuring and organizing the WBC, decomposing the upper WBC levels into lower level detailed components, developing and assigning identification codes to the WBC components, verifying that the degree of decomposition of the deliverables is appropriate. Here I will send you this lecture. You can see the detailed workflow diagram of WBC. Expert judgment. Expert judgment is often used to analyze the information needed to decompose a project deliverables down into smaller components parts in order to create an effective WBC. Expert judgment can also come in the form of predefining templates that provide the guidelines on how to effectively break down common deliverables. Such templates may be industry or discipline specific or may come from experience gained in a similar projects. Scope baseline. Scope baseline is approved version of scope statement and project scope statement. The project scope statement includes the description of the project scope, measured deliverables, and assumption and constraints. WBC work breakdown structure. The WBC is a hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by the project team to accomplish the project objectives and create the required deliverables. WBC dictionary. The WBC dictionary is a document that provides the detailed deliverable activity and scheduling information about each component in the WBC. Validate scope. Validate scope is the process of formalizing acceptance of the completed project deliverables. Here, the main thing which you have to know is verified deliverables. Verified deliverables are project deliverables that are completed and checked for correctness through the control quality process. Work performance data. Work performance data can include the degree of compliance with the requirements, number of nonconformities, severity of the nonconformities, or the number of validation cycles performed in a period of time. Inspection. Inspection includes activities such as measuring, examining, and validating to determine whether work and deliverables meet requirements and product acceptance criteria. Group decision-making techniques. These techniques are used to reach the conclusion when the validation is performed by the project team and other stakeholders. And last one is acceptance deliverables. Deliverables that meet the acceptance criteria are formally signed off and approved by the customer or sponsor. Change request. The completed deliverables that have not been formally accepted are documented, along with the reason for non-acceptance of those deliverables. Work performance information. Work performance information includes the information about the project progress. Project documents updates. Project documents that may be updated as a result of the validate scope process include any documents that define the product or report status on a product completions. Control scope. Control scope is the process of monitoring the status of the project and product scope, managing changes to the scope baseline. Here in the input you have project management plan, requirements documentation, requirements traceability matrix, work performance data, organizational processes set. In tool and techniques, variance analysis on output, work performance information, change requests, project management plan updates, project documentation updates, organizational process asset updates. Here is a workflow of control scope. Project management plan. The following information from the project management plan is used to control scope. Scope baseline, scope management plan, change management plan, configuration management plan, and the requirements management plan. Requirements documentation. The requirements should be unambiguous, measurable, and testable. Requirements traceability matrix. The requirements traceability matrix help to detect the impact of any change and or deviation from the scope baseline on the project objectives. Work performance data. Work performance data can include the number of change requests received, the number of requests accepted, or the number of deliverables completed. Organizational process set. Organizational process sets that can influence the control scope process include existing formal and informal scope, monitoring and reporting methods. Variance analysis. Variance analysis is a technique for determining the cause and degree of difference between the baseline and actual performance. Work performance information. Work performance information produces include this correlated and contextualized information on how the project scope is performing compared to the scope baseline. Change requests. Change request is analysis of scope performance can result in a change request to the scope baseline or other components of the project management plan. Project management plan updates. Project management plan updates may include scope baseline updates, other baseline updates. Project management updates. Here, requirements documentation, requirements traceability matrix. Organizational process asset updates. Its cause or cause of variance, corrective action chosen, and the reason. Okay, it's end of lecture number 5. Here at the end you have task number 4. First thing here is the deadline, 3rd March. Okay, and about the requirements of task. In your YouTube channel you must upload one video. This video shows MVP, minimum viable product of your project. And how in the lecture was explained, you have to find 2 experts outside of team who explain advantage and disadvantage of your project. And also your video must include your future plans of your project. Future plan means how you see your final stage of your project. Here in this video, these last two parts can be explained by your project manager of your team, and the first stage where you have to show your MVP of your project, all your team member must explain their part, their work maybe, and their role on the project. But it's not mandatory. These other 2 parts also can be explained by anyone. It's just idea from my side. Okay. I will check the uploaded video by uploading time. So for missing deadline, I will not accept your task. If you have missed this task, you will not get grade for that. So thank you. This is end of lecture 5.